A mother with triplets knocked on a billionaire's door on Christmas Eve, holding an envelope. But what he discovered upon reading the letter left him speechless. Snowflakes danced gently under the Christmas lights as Claire adjusted the heavy envelope in her trembling hands. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes to midnight. 15 minutes to change everything. "Mum, I'm cold," whispered Anne, the youngest of the triplets, her golden curls escaping from her red hat. Claire pulled her daughter closer, while Louis and Michel huddled against her worn coat. Before them, the Laurent mansion stood imposing, its lit windows revealing the Christmas party happening inside. Laughter and music escaped through the cracks, a cruel contrast to the heavy silence enveloping Claire and her children outside the iron gates. "Is that a castle, Mum?" Michel asked, his green eyes, identical to those of the father he never knew, shining with childlike fascination. Claire swallowed hard, memories flooding her mind like an avalanche. 7 years ago, on this very date, she had made her decision. The newspaper in her hands reported her parents' death in a tragic accident, but the hidden document in her drawer told a different story. A story of betrayal, greed, and destruction, signed by Robert Laurent. "No, sweetheart," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "It's just a big house where a man who needs to know the truth lives." The envelope weighed like lead in her hands. Inside it, not only proof of the triplets' paternity, but also documents that would destroy the empire Robert had built on the ruins of her life. Louis, the most observant of the three, tugged at the sleeve of his mother's coat. "Why are we here on Christmas Eve, Mum? I thought we were going to make cookies like every year." Claire knelt in the snow, looking into the 3 pairs of eyes that were her only reason to keep going. "Sometimes, my loves, Christmas gifts come in different forms. Today we're delivering a very special gift." The mansion's extravagant decorations blinked in red and gold, garlands and bows adorning every pillar. Claire still remembered the day she discovered the truth about Robert, the same day she found out she was pregnant with triplets. The irony of fate, carrying the children of the man who destroyed her family. "It's time," she murmured, more to herself than to the children. Her fingers tightened around the envelope where she had written, "For Robert Laurent, the truth can't wait another Christmas." The snow began to fall heavier, as if the very sky wanted to witness what was about to happen. Claire adjusted the children's coats one last time, her heart beating to the rhythm of the revenge she had planned for 7 long years. "Come on, little ones," she said, taking the first step toward the front door. "It's time to meet your father." The doorbell echoed like a funeral bell through the mansion. Claire could hear footsteps approaching from the other side of the door, the moment she had rehearsed thousands of times finally arriving. In her arms, the envelope carried more than papers. It carried the power to destroy an empire, reveal a paternity, and perhaps avenge a destroyed family. But as the triplets huddled against her, Claire felt for the first time a pang of doubt. The doorknob turned slowly. It was too late to turn back. The plan was in motion, like an avalanche that couldn't be stopped. And when the door finally opened, Claire knew that this Christmas Eve would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone about to discover that some gifts come wrapped in devastating truths. The door opened, revealing Robert Laurent in all his imposing glory. The perfectly aligned tuxedo, the gold watch on his wrist, the same expensive cologne Claire still kept in her memory. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and she saw the exact moment recognition hit him. "Claire," his voice faltered as his gaze shifted between her and the 3 children. The champagne glass in his hand trembled slightly. Behind him, the Christmas party was in full swing. Women in designer dresses, men in expensive suits, waiters circulating with silver trays. A 5-meter Christmas tree dominated the main hall, its ornaments probably costing more than Claire's annual rent. "Good evening, Robert," she said, her calm voice masking years of resentment. "Forgive me for interrupting your party, but there's something that can't wait any longer." Louis, always the protector, stepped forward as if wanting to defend his mother. Anne partially hid behind Claire's legs, while Michel, ever curious, stared intently at Robert. Your children?" Robert asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. His green eyes, identical to Michel's, scanned the children's faces with a mix of growing fascination and terror. "May we come in?" Claire asked, deliberately ignoring the question. "What I have to show shouldn't be seen out here." Robert hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wider, gesturing for them to enter his private office, away from the party. The contrast was stark. Claire and the children's simple but dignified clothes against the mansion's ostentatious luxury. "Do you kids like hot chocolate?" Robert abruptly asked the children, his voice attempting to sound casual as he closed the office door. "With marshmallows?" Anne asked timidly, speaking for the first time. "Martha," Robert called, and a maid appeared almost instantly. "Bring hot chocolate for the children, with marshmallows." Claire watched as the triplets settled on the leather sofa, their worn boots leaving small snow prints on the Persian rug. Robert couldn't take his eyes off them, especially Michelle, who was his miniature copy. "The first document," Claire said, pulling a smaller envelope from the larger one. "I suggest you read it now." Robert opened the envelope with hands that tried not to tremble. His eyes scanned the paper, and Claire saw the exact moment the color drained from his face. This can't be possible," he murmured, sinking heavily into his mahogany chair. "The DNA test says otherwise," Claire replied coldly. "They were born on March 15th, exactly 9 months after that last night by the lake." The children, oblivious to the growing tension, exclaimed in joy when Martha returned with the hot chocolate. Robert watched their every move as if seeing ghosts, the way Louis blew on the hot drink, identical to his own habit. Anne's shy smile, the same as his late mother's. Michelle's decisive gestures, a mirror of his own as a child. "Why now?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "After 7 years." Claire leaned forward, her eyes fixed on his. "Because this is just the beginning, Robert. The first move in a game you started long ago when you destroyed my family." "Mom," Michelle called, interrupting the moment. "Can I have more marshmallows?" "Of course you can," Robert replied automatically, before Claire could open her mouth. It was the first time he spoke as a father, even unknowingly. Claire watched the scene with a mix of conflicting emotions. For 7 years, she had rehearsed this moment, planned her revenge down to the smallest detail, but seeing Robert interact with his children, even if briefly, made something inside her waver. "There are more documents," she said, her voice regaining firmness. "Many more. But for today, I want you to absorb this truth. These are your children, Robert. The children you never knew you had, just like you never knew how many lives you destroyed in your climb to the top." Robert looked at the children again, now playing with the marshmallows, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. Do they know?" he asked, his voice choked. "No," Claire replied, standing up. "Not yet, but they will soon know the whole truth, every little detail of it." She gathered the triplets, who protested at having to leave their half-finished hot chocolate. Robert remained paralyzed in his chair, the crumpled DNA test in his hands. "Merry Christmas, Robert," Claire said, standing at the office door. "Tomorrow I'll bring the next envelope. I suggest you prepare yourself." When the door closed behind them, the sound of the party filled the hallway again. But for Robert Laurent, sitting alone in his luxurious office, the world had just crumbled to the sound of children's laughter and the clinking of spoons in hot chocolate cups. The game had begun. The scent of lavender and fresh bread filled the air as Claire, then 20, descended the stairs of the Hotel Lavande. The morning sun bathed the lobby in golden hues, reflecting off the antique frames and polished wooden floor. It was more than a hotel. It was the legacy of 3 generations of the Dubois family. "Ah, good morning, ma chérie." Her mother Amélie's warm voice echoed from the reception. "Come, we have a new guest for you to meet." Claire adjusted the embroidered apron with the hotel's emblem, a delicate sprig of lavender, and approached the counter. That's when she saw him for the first time, Robert Laurent, 30, impeccable in his grey suit, a confident smile on his lips. "Miss Dubois, I presume?" He extended his hand, his green eyes shining with an intensity that made Claire blush. "Robert Laurent, financial consultant. Your father hired me to modernize things around here a bit." The handshake lasted a second longer than it should have. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine, unsure if it was excitement or a premonition of what was to come. In the following weeks, Robert became a constant presence at the hotel. Always charming, always with a new idea. always making Claire feel special with his glances and subtle attentions. "You have a raw diamond here," he would tell Jean-Luc, Claire's father, as they reviewed the accounting books. "With a few adjustments, we can turn Lavande into a boutique hotel chain. Think of the possibilities." Jean-Luc's eyes sparkled with the prospect. The Hotel Lavande had always been profitable, but modest. The idea of expansion, of leaving an even greater legacy for Claire, was tempting, but not everyone shared the enthusiasm. Amélie, with her sharp intuition, expressed reservations. "There's something in his eyes, Jean-Luc," she confided at night, away from Claire's ears, "like a wolf disguised as a lamb." Claire, however, was enchanted. Robert treated her as an equal, asking for her opinion on the changes, praising her ideas. On starry nights, they walked through the lavender gardens, dreaming of the grand future awaiting the hotel. It was on one of those nights that he kissed her for the first time, the scent of lavender mixed with his expensive cologne. Claire felt as if the world had stopped turning. "You are the true treasure of this place," Robert whispered against her lips. But as the months passed, the dream began to show cracks. Long-trusted suppliers were replaced by others, supposedly more efficient, but who delivered inferior quality products. Loyal employees, some who had worked at the hotel for decades, were fired in the name of efficiency. "You have to break a few eggs to make an omelette," Robert argued when Jean-Luc expressed concern. "Trust me." And Jean-Luc trusted. How could he not trust the man who was transforming his small hotel into a rising empire? How could he not trust the man who made his daughter smile like that? But then came the first real signs of trouble. Overdue bills, mysteriously cancelled reservations, negative online reviews that seemed to come out of nowhere. "It must be the competition trying to sabotage us," Robert assured. Don't worry, I have a plan." The plan, as Claire would discover much too late, was the complete ruin of the Dubois family. On a rainy October night, when the hotel was almost empty, Claire overheard a heated argument coming from her father's office. She silently approached the slightly open door. "You've ruined us!" Jean-Luc's voice trembled with anger. "All those contracts, the loans, it was all a fraud." "Business is business, my dear." Robert's voice sounded cold, devoid of his usual charm. "You should have read the fine print." "I'll report you," Jean-Luc threatened. "I won't let you destroy my family's legacy." The sound of cruel laughter made Claire shiver. And who would believe you? A bankrupt hotelier against a successful businessman. Be reasonable, Jean-Luc. Accept the buyout offer and we can forget all this. Claire wanted to scream, wanted to burst in and confront Robert, but shock kept her paralyzed. When she finally regained her senses and opened the door, the office was empty. Through the window, she saw her parents' car driving away hurriedly. 3 hours later, she received the call that would change her life forever. Accident on the road, heavy rain, brakes failed. The policeman's words blurred into a haze of pain and disbelief. Claire fell to her knees in the hotel lobby, the scent of lavender now feeling suffocating. In the days that followed, as she dealt with grief and funeral arrangements, Claire discovered the extent of the damage. The Hotel Lavande was drowning in debt, mortgaged to the last cent. Fraudulent contracts had been signed, transferring ownership to a mysterious holding company. And Robert? He had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only destruction and a broken heart. On the day of the funeral, as the rain gently fell on her parents' coffins, Claire spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Robert, impeccable in a black suit, watched the scene with an indecipherable expression. Their eyes met for an instant, and in that moment Claire felt something inside her harden. A week later, the Hotel Lavande was closed. Claire, at 20, found herself alone in the world, without family, without a home, without a future. While packing the few things she could salvage, she found a newspaper announcing Robert Laurent's meteoric rise in the business world. That night, sitting in the empty room that had been her home for 2 decades, Claire made a promise to herself and to the ghosts of her parents. One day, no matter how long it took, she would have her revenge. What she didn't know was that fate had its own plans, and that her revenge would come wrapped in the cries of 3 newborns exactly 7 years later. The reflection in the clinic bathroom mirror showed a different woman from the broken young girl of 5 years ago. Claire Dubois, now 25, adjusted the name tag on her white coat. Claire Martin, it read. A common name, easy to forget. Perfect. Getting the job as a nurse at the city's most exclusive private clinic was not easy. Months of planning, a meticulously crafted resume, fake references that cost a small fortune. But she did it. And now, she was just steps away from her target, Robert Laurent. Miss Martin, Mr. Laurent is ready for his routine exams. The receptionist's voice sounded over the intercom. Claire took a deep breath, practicing the gentle and professional smile she had rehearsed for months. Upon entering the exam room, her heart raced, but not for the reason she imagined. Robert was there, older, more sophisticated, but with the same piercing green eyes she remembered. For a moment, Claire feared being recognized, but his gaze passed over her without any sign of recognition. "Good afternoon, Mr. Laurent. I'll take your vital signs," she said, her voice calm and neutral. In the months that followed, Claire became a constant presence in Robert's routine. Always professional, always discreet. She observed, listened, and slowly began to gain his trust. "You know, Miss Martin," Robert commented one day as she measured his blood pressure, "there's something about you that reminds me of someone I knew a long time ago." Claire felt a chill down her spine but maintained her composure. "I hope it's a pleasant memory, Mr. Laurent." He smiled, a smile that she once found charming but now knew hid so many secrets. Not all memories are they? It was at that moment that Claire realized Robert carried his own ghosts, and she would use that to her advantage. Gradually, their interactions became more personal. A coffee here, a prolonged conversation there. Claire built a careful persona, the dedicated nurse with a sad past, parents killed in a car accident, ironically, and modest dreams. Robert, in turn, began to lower his guard. Perhaps it was the familiarity he felt with her, without knowing why. Perhaps it was the loneliness of a man at the top, with no one to truly trust. The kiss happened on a rainy night, 6 months after their first meeting at the clinic. Robert had stayed late, complaining of headaches. Claire was on duty. "You're different from all the ones I've known," he whispered, his lips millimeters from hers. Claire hesitated. This was not the plan. Feeling something for him was not the plan. But when their lips met, years of anger and pain mixed with a passion she thought she had buried long ago, the romance blossomed quickly. Robert, always cautious in his relationships, seemed to have found in Claire someone he could fully trust. She, in turn, struggled internally. Each smile, each touch, each moment of intimacy was a battle between the love reborn and the vengeance she had sworn. It was during a weekend at his country house that Claire made her biggest discovery. While Robert slept, she searched his office, finding documents proving fraudy, bribery and manipulations that went far beyond what had happened to her family. With trembling hands, she photographed each page, each piece of evidence of Robert's true nature, and it was on that same night, with the evidence safe on her phone, that she discovered she was pregnant. The positive pregnancy test seemed to mock her. 2 pink lines that represented the ultimate conflict between her heart and her mission. In the weeks that followed, Claire lived in a whirlwind of emotions. Robert, upon learning of the pregnancy, was ecstatic. For the first time, she saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "Let's get married," he proposed, a diamond ring in his hands. "I want to do everything right this time." Claire smiled, tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of happiness. They were tears of conflict, of pain, of an impossible decision that had to be made. One night, alone in her small apartment, she spread out all the evidence she had collected. Photos, documents, recordings, enough to destroy Robert Laurent and everything he had built. Next to them, she placed the first ultrasound of the baby. "Josh, what should I do?" she whispered to the empty room, as if the ghosts of her parents could answer. The decision came with dawn. Claire could not, would not, abandon her mission. Not after everything she had been through, not after everything Robert had done. But she also could not deny the life growing inside her. With renewed determination, she outlined a new plan. She would use the pregnancy, use Robert's love, to collect even more evidence, to get even closer to the heart of his empire. "I'll marry you," she said to Robert the next morning. "But I want to be part of everything. Your life, your business, everything." Robert, blinded by what he believed was true love, agreed enthusiastically. "So we'll be partners in everything, my love." In the months that followed, as her belly grew, Claire infiltrated deeper and deeper into Robert's world. Each signed document, each business meeting, each whispered phone conversation was a piece of the puzzle she meticulously assembled. And then, in the 7th month of pregnancy, came the surprise. Triplets. 3 innocent lives that further complicated her plan of revenge. On the night she discovered they would be 2 boys and a girl, Claire cried. She cried for the love she felt for her unborn children. She cried for the vengeance that still burned in her chest. She cried for the conflict that tore her soul apart, but when the tears dried, her resolve was stronger than ever. She would carry out her plan, not only for her parents but for her children, to give them a world where men like Robert Laurent could not destroy lives with impunity. On the day the triplets were born, with Robert holding her hand and tears of joy in his eyes, Claire made a silent promise. She would wait. She would wait until her children were old enough to understand. She would wait until she had all the pieces in place, and then, when the moment was perfect, she would bring down Robert Laurent's house of cards, revealing to the world, and to him, the truth behind Claire Martin. The perfect plan was in motion, sealed with the cries of 3 newborns and the kiss of a man who had no idea of the hurricane awaiting him. The wall clock in Robert's office struck midnight when he finally opened the envelope Claire had given him. The sound of the Christmas party, now distant, contrasted with the sepulchral silence enveloping him. With trembling hands, Robert unfolded the first document. It was a DNA test, clinically detailed and irrefutable. His eyes scanned the lines of genetic information, stopping abruptly at the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. "No," he murmured, his voice choked. "It can't be." But the evidence was there, in black and white. Louis, Anne, and Michelle, the 3 little ones he had just met, were his children. Children he never knew existed. Robert slumped heavily into his chair, his mind a whirlwind of questions. How was this possible? Why had Claire never told him? And then, like a thunderbolt, realization struck him. Claire Martin, Claire Dubois, the same person. "My God," he whispered, running his hands over his face. "What have I done?" The second document in the envelope was a letter. The elegant handwriting of Marie, his late wife, was unmistakable. Robert felt a chill down his spine as he began to read. "My dear Robert, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer among the living, and the truth has finally come to light. There is so much I need to confess, so many sins I carry." The letter detailed, in painful minutiae, how Marie had discovered Robert's affair with Claire, how, consumed by jealousy and fear of losing everything, she had orchestrated a plan to permanently drive Claire away. "I threatened her, Robert. Told her I would destroy her career, ruin her life and her family's if she didn't disappear. I didn't know about the pregnancy at the time, I swear. But when I found out, God forgive me, I did nothing to correct my mistake." Robert felt nauseous. Each word was a stab, revealing a web of lies and manipulations he never imagined existed. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness and a request that Robert do what was right if the truth ever came to light. Rising abruptly, Robert walked to the window. Outside, the snow fell softly, covering the garden with a white, pristine blanket. So pure, so immaculate, the opposite of what his life was revealing itself to be. A noise from the adjacent room brought him back to reality. The children, his children, were still there, curiously exploring the luxurious environment they had never known. Robert opened the door silently, watching them. Louis stood before a bookshelf, his fingers tracing the contours of the leather-bound books. Anne, the youngest, was curled up on the sofa, hugging a silk pillow as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And Michelle. Robert felt his heart skip a beat. Michel stood before a large mirror, his green eyes, identical to Robert's own, fixed on his reflection. For a moment, past and present merged, and Robert saw himself as a child in that same position. "And you like the house?" he asked softly, startling the children. "It's very big," Anne replied timidly, "and beautiful. It has lots of books," Louis added, his tone making it clear that this was a positive thing. Michel, however, remained silent, his eyes studying Robert with a disconcerting intensity. "Claire, would you like to see the rest of the house?" Robert found himself asking, surprising himself. The children exchanged glances, as if silently consulting each other before nodding. As Robert guided the triplets through the ornately decorated mansion hallways, Claire watched from a distance, her heart torn between the tenderness of the scene and the determination of her plan. It was when they reached the grand party hall that the tension peaked. The housekeeper, Madame Elise, a lady who had worked for the Laurents for decades, froze at the sight of the group. Her eyes darted from Robert to the children and finally rested on Claire. Recognition was instantaneous. "My God," she whispered, bringing her hands to her mouth. "You—" Claire stepped forward, her pleading gaze meeting Madame Elise's. An unspoken understanding passed between the two women. "Madame Elise," Robert called, his voice tense, "please take the children to the kitchen for a snack. Claire and I need to talk." The housekeeper nodded, still stunned, and gently guided the triplets out of the hall, casting worried glances back. Once alone, the air between Robert and Claire became heavy with unspoken emotions. "Why?" Robert finally broke the silence, his voice a mix of pain and anger. "Why hide this from me for 7 years?" Claire raised her chin, her eyes shining with a mix of defiance and hurt. "Do you really need to ask, Robert? After everything you did to my family?" "I didn't know," he began, but Claire cut him off. "Didn't know? Or chose not to know? How many other lives have you destroyed in the name of your precious empire, Robert?" The silence that followed was deafening. Robert seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. "What do you want, Claire?" he finally asked, his voice weary. A cold smile curved Claire's lips. "Justice, Robert. And believe me, this is just the beginning." At that moment, the sound of children's laughter echoed down the hallway. The contrast between the innocence of that sound and the tension in the air was palpable. "Doris, they don't know, do they?" Robert asked, referring to the children. "No," Claire replied, "not yet, but soon they will know the whole truth, about who you are, about what you've done." Robert closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his past actions and the fear of what was to come. When he opened them again, there was a renewed determination in his gaze. "I will fix this, Claire. Somehow I will fix everything." Claire watched him for a long moment, years of pain, love, and hatred reflected in her eyes. "It's too late for that, Robert. The game has begun, and this time I make the rules." As she walked away to join the children in the kitchen, Robert remained in the hall, the realization that his life was about to crumble, weighing on his shoulders like a ton of bricks. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the past and preparing the ground for what was to come. The Christmas Eve night, which had begun with an extravagant party, ended with the unveiling of long-buried secrets and the premonition of a storm that would forever change the lives of all involved. Dawn was breaking, and the Laurent mansion, once vibrant with the Christmas party, was now oppressed by a heavy silence. In the office, Robert stared at the second envelope Claire had given him, its contents spread out on the mahogany desk like pieces of a macabre puzzle. "It can't be," he murmured, his fingers trembling as he touched a yellow document. It was a contract, dated 15 years ago with the Hotel Lavande logo at the top. Claire, seated on the other side of the desk, watched his every reaction with hawk-like eyes. "Recognize this, don't you?" Robert swallowed hard, suppressed memories flooding back. "Your parents' hotel." "The hotel you destroyed," Claire corrected, her voice as cold as ice. Among the papers, Robert found manipulated financial reports, contracts with obscure clauses, and emails exchanged with questionable business partners. Each document was a piece of the elaborate scheme he had orchestrated to take control of the Hotel Lavande. "I was young, ambitious," as Robert began, but the words died in his throat as he saw Claire's icy gaze. "Ambition doesn't justify destroying lives, Robert," she retorted. "But this was just the beginning, wasn't it? With trembling hands, Claire pushed a thin envelope towards him. Robert opened it, feeling as if he were defusing a bomb. It was a police report. The date matched the night Claire's parents died. Robert felt his blood run cold as he read the details of the accident. The brakes, he whispered, horror growing in his eyes, were tampered with, Claire completed, her voice eerily calm. A very convenient mechanical failure, don't you think? Robert stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, the snowstorm had intensified, turning the world into a white whirlwind. Reflected in the glass, he saw not the powerful businessman he had become, but the greedy young man he once was, willing to do anything for success. I didn't know, he said, his voice barely audible. I wanted the hotel, yes, but I never wanted anyone to die. Claire stood up, moving closer. Her proximity was almost suffocating. But they died, Robert, and you built your empire on the ruins of my family. The silence that followed was interrupted by a noise from the hallway. The office door opened slowly, revealing the frightened faces of the triplets. Mom, Anne called, her voice small and uncertain. Is everything okay? Claire immediately changed her posture, a soft smile replacing the hard expression of moments before. Yes, dear, we're just talking. Louis, always the most perceptive, looked from Claire to Robert, his eyes narrowing slightly. You both look angry. Robert felt a lump in his throat. How to explain to innocent children the weight of past sins? Sometimes adults have difficult conversations, he tried to explain, his voice hoarse. But everything is okay. Michel, who had been silent until then, stepped forward. His eyes, so much like Robert's, seemed to pierce his father's soul. Did you do something bad? The question, so direct and innocent, hit Robert like a punch. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Claire, maintaining an admirable calm, knelt to the children's level. It's late, my loves. How about we go back to bed? Tomorrow will be a long day. As she guided the triplets back to the guest room, Robert remained paralyzed, the words of Michel echoing in his mind. Did you do something bad? Yes, he had. And now, the weight of his actions threatened to crush him. When Claire returned, she found Robert seated in his chair, his head in his hands. They're extraordinary, he murmured. So intuitive, so pure. They are, Claire agreed, her voice a mix of pride and sadness. And they deserve to know the truth about their father. Robert looked up, panic evident in his eyes. Claire, please, they're just children. Don't destroy the image they have of me. A bitter smile curved Claire's lips. Like you destroyed my family. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the howling wind outside. The storm had intensified, as if nature itself was reacting to the tension inside the mansion. What do you want, Claire? Robert finally asked, his voice defeated. Justice, she replied simply. I want you to feel every ounce of the weight I've carried all these years. I want you to understand what it's like to lose everything. Robert looked at her, a silent plea in his eyes. And the children. They don't deserve to grow up without a father. Like I grew up without parents, Claire retorted, but her voice wavered slightly. At that moment, a deafening thunderclap shook the mansion. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the office into darkness. Mom! The frightened cry came from the hallway. Claire moved instinctively towards the door, but Robert was faster. I'll check the generator, he said, already leaving the room. As Claire rushed to comfort the children, Robert descended the stairs to the basement. The darkness and cold were oppressive, but not as much as the weight of guilt he carried. After starting the emergency generator, the lights flickered back on, dimly illuminating the mansion. Robert climbed the stairs, the sounds of the children's sobs guiding him. In the guest room, he found Claire huddled with the triplets, whispering words of comfort. Their little boots left small snow prints on the Persian rug. Robert couldn't take his eyes off them, especially Michel, who was his miniature copy. Everything's okay now, he said softly, entering the room. It was just a power outage because of the storm. The children looked at him, a mix of fear and curiosity in their eyes. Anne reached out a trembling hand towards him, and Robert felt his heart break. At that moment, looking at Claire and the children he barely knew, Robert Laurent made a decision. No matter what Claire planned, no matter the price he would have to pay, he would do whatever it took to make things right. "I'll make some hot chocolate for everyone," he announced, his voice filled with an emotion he couldn't name. As he headed to the kitchen, Robert knew that dawn would bring more revelations, more pain. But for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. A hope for redemption, for a chance to be the man, the father he should have been all these years. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the Laurent mansion, another storm, years in the making, was slowly beginning to subside. Christmas morning arrived quietly and coldly, the storm from the night before leaving a white, pristine world outside the Laurent mansion. Inside out, however, the tension was palpable, as if the air was charged with electricity. Robert found Claire in the library, the first rays of sun reflecting off the countless leather-bound books. She stood before the fireplace, the dancing flames mirrored in her determined eyes. "It's time, Robert," she said, without turning around. "I want to hear it all, every sordid detail of your plan to destroy my family." Robert felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier. He sat heavily in a leather armchair, running his hands over his tired face. "Where do you want me to start?" he asked, his voice defeated. "From the beginning," Claire replied, finally turning to face him. "When you decided that the Hotel Lavande would be yours, no matter the cost." Robert closed his eyes, memories flooding his mind. "I was young, too ambitious. I saw the hotel's potential, but I knew your parents would never sell, so I devised a plan." He began to detail the elaborate scheme: fraudulent contracts, manipulated accounting books, pressure on suppliers to raise prices. Each word was like a knife in Claire's heart, but she absorbed it all, her expression unchanging. "The loans," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. "How did you get my father to sign?" Robert swallowed hard. I forged his signature. I had access to the documents, studied for weeks until I could make a perfect copy." Claire closed her eyes, the pain evident on her face. "And Marie, what was her role in all this?" It was at this moment that Robert hesitated, remorse clear in his eyes. "Marie found out what I was doing. At first, she was horrified, threatened to expose me. But then what?" Claire pressed. "Then she saw an opportunity," Robert confessed, shame evident in his voice. "Marie always wanted a life of luxury, of status. She saw in my plan a chance to achieve that." Claire felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Marie, the woman she once considered a friend, had been an accomplice in her ruin. "It was her idea to drive you away," Robert continued, his voice almost a whisper. "She feared you would find out, that you would ruin everything." I didn't know about the threats, Claire. I swear I didn't know." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire struggled to process everything she was hearing, years of pain and anger mixing with a new understanding of the extent of the betrayal she had suffered. "And my parents?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "The accident," Robert paled visibly. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt, Claire. The brakes, it was a genuine accident, but I knew they were going to confront my partners that night. I could have stopped it, could have confessed everything, but I was a coward." The tears Claire had held back for so long finally began to fall. Years of pain, of loss, of loneliness, all coming to the surface at once. It was at this moment that a small noise caught their attention. Turning towards the slightly open library door, they saw 3 pairs of wide eyes watching them. Louis, Anne, and Michel were there, having heard most of Robert's confession. Their young faces showed a mix of confusion, fear, and an understanding beyond their years. "Dad!" Michel called, his voice small and uncertain. "Did you hurt Mum?" Robert's world crumbled in that instant. Seeing the fear and disappointment in his children's eyes was more than he could bear. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I made terrible mistakes," he sobbed, reaching out trembling hands towards the children. "For mistakes I can never fully undo." Claire, seeing the suffering in her children's eyes, felt for the first time a pang of doubt in her plan for revenge. Was it fair to expose the children to all this pain? Louis, always the bravest, stepped forward. But you can fix it, can't you? Mom always says we should fix what we break. The innocence of the statement hit Claire and Robert like a thunderbolt. For a moment, they saw the situation through the children's eyes. Not a game of revenge and redemption, but a broken family in need of healing. Claire knelt next to the triplets, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes, adults make very big mistakes. Mistakes that deeply hurt other people. Like when I broke Grandma's vase, Anne asked timidly. A sad smile crossed Claire's lips. A bit more serious than that, dear. But yes, the idea is similar. Robert, still on his knees, looked directly into Claire's eyes. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said, his voice choked. But I'll do anything. Anything to try to fix what I've done. Not for me, but for them. He gestured towards the children. Claire felt something shift inside her at that moment. The revenge she had nurtured for so long, the desire to see Robert suffer and lose everything, began to lose its flavor. Seeing Robert interact with his children, even if briefly, made something inside her waver. It won't be easy, she said finally, her voice firm but no longer cold. There's a lot to repair, a lot to explain. Michel, the most sensitive of the three, moved closer to Robert, tentatively touching his tear-streaked face. It's okay, Dad, he said softly. Everyone makes mistakes. In that moment, something broke inside Robert. He hugged his son, sobbing openly, years of guilt and remorse finally coming to the surface. Claire watched the scene, her own emotions in turmoil. The revenge she had cultivated for so long began to seem empty in the face of the love and forgiveness of her children. What do we do now? Louis asked, always the practical one. Claire took a deep breath, looking from her children to Robert and back. Now, she said slowly, we start to fix things. It won't be quick, it won't be easy, but it's what we need to do. For you, for us, for all the people affected by the mistakes of the past. Robert looked up, a glimmer of hope shining through his tears. I'll do whatever it takes, Claire. Anything. Claire nodded slowly. Then this is our point of no return, Robert. From now on, every action, every decision will be to fix the mistakes of the past and build a better future for our children. As the Christmas sun rose in the sky outside, illuminating the snow-covered world, inside the Laurent mansion, a new journey was beginning. A journey of redemption, forgiveness, and perhaps healing. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, both Claire and Robert felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The silence that followed Robert's confession was broken by the sudden sound of hurried footsteps and a door slamming. Claire and Robert looked at each other, panic rising in their eyes. "So are the children," Claire exclaimed, running into the hallway. The room where the triplets were staying was empty, the window open, letting in the cold wind and snowflakes. On the bed, a hastily scribbled note. "We don't want any more fighting. We're going to find the real Santa." Claire's heart seemed to stop. "No, no, no," she murmured, terror gripping her body. Robert appeared in the doorway, breathless. They ran away." Claire could only nod, unable to speak. The reality of the situation hit them like a thunderbolt. 3 7-year-old children, alone in the snowstorm, on unfamiliar grounds. "We have to find them," Robert shouted, already running down the stairs. Claire followed, her maternal instinct overriding any resentment. Outside him, the storm had worsened. The wind howled, whipping snow into their faces as they shouted the children's names. "Louis! Anne! Michel!" Their voices blended with the roar of the storm. As they searched the mansion grounds, memories flooded Claire's mind. She remembered her own parents, her father carrying her on his shoulders during walks in the Hotel Lavande garden, her mother singing her to sleep on stormy nights. "They must be so scared," Claire sobbed, the snow mixing with the tears on her face. Robert, seeing Claire's despair, felt a wave of guilt crush him. All this was the result of his actions, his lies. "We'll find them," he promised, his voice choked, "even if I have to search every inch of this property." They continued the search, shouting until their voices were hoarse. The Laurent property was vast, with dense woods and a small lake, now frozen. Each passing minute increased the danger for the children. "We should call the police," Claire said finally, shivering from the cold and fear. Robert nodded, pulling out his cell phone with trembling hands, but before he could dial, they heard a distant cry. "Over there!" Claire pointed to a wooded area. The sound came from that direction. They ran, stumbling through the deep snow. The cry came again, clearer this time. "It's Anne's voice," Robert exclaimed. They crossed a group of pine trees and finally saw them. The triplets were huddled under a large tree, shivering and hugging each other. "Mom! Dad!" Michelle cried out upon seeing them. Claire ran, falling to her knees in the snow and hugging the three tightly. "Never do this again," she sobbed, kissing their cold faces. "You could have gotten hurt, or worse." Robert joined the embrace, tears streaming down his face. "We're here now. You're safe." Louis, always the bravest, spoke between shivers. We didn't want any more fighting. We thought if we left, you would stop arguing." The words hit Claire like a punch. "Oh, my loves," she said softly. "Adult arguments are not your fault. Never." Robert picked up Anne, noticing how cold she was. "Let's go back home. You need to warm up." As they walked back to the mansion, the storm began to subside, as if nature was responding to their relief. Once inside, after hot baths and dry clothes, they all gathered in the living room. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and the triplets were wrapped in thick blankets, sipping hot chocolate. Claire watched her children, the fear of loss still fresh in her mind. Robert, sitting beside her, seemed equally shaken. "I'm so sorry," he said softly, for Claire's ears only. "For everything. If anything had happened to them, I would never forgive myself." Claire looked at him, seeing for the first time beyond the mask of the successful businessman. She saw a broken man, desperate to do the right thing. "They're safe now," she replied, her voice softening a bit. "That's what matters." Robert nodded, then turned to the children. "Say, Louis, Anne, Michelle, I owe you an apology. What you heard today, Han, it's complicated and probably very confusing for you." The triplets looked at him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I made many mistakes in the past," Robert continued, his voice trembling slightly. "Mistakes that hurt your mother and many other people. There's no excuse for what I did, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry, and I'll do everything I can to make things right." Claire felt a pang in her heart. The man speaking now was very different from the one she had planned to destroy. The revenge she had nurtured for so long began to seem empty in the face of Robert's genuine remorse and the evident love he showed for the children. "We're sorry too," Louis said, surprising the adults. "We shouldn't have run away. It was dangerous and scary and cold," Anne added, huddling a bit more in her blanket. Michelle, who had been silent until then, looked from Claire to Robert. "Are you still going to fight?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Claire and Robert exchanged a look, years of pain, hurt, and secrets passing between them in seconds. "No, dear," Claire replied finally. "We're not going to fight anymore. But we have a lot to talk about and resolve." Robert nodded, grateful for the opening Claire was offering. "That's right. And I promise that, no matter what happens, you three will always be our priority." The children seemed to relax a bit with these words. The clock on the wall struck noon, reminding everyone that it was, after all, Christmas Day. "How about we open some presents?" Robert suggested, trying to bring some normality to the chaotic day. As the children excitedly began to open presents, Claire stepped away a bit, looking out the window. The storm had ceased, leaving behind a white, silent world. She thought of her parents, of the hotel that had been her home, of the lives that had been destroyed. But she also thought of the three little miracles sitting in the room, of second chances, and of the possibility of healing. Robert approached her hesitantly. "Claire, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise, from now on, I'll do everything in my power to make things right. Not just for you or the children, but because it's the right thing to do." Claire looked at him for a long moment, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "The path will be long, Robert. There's a lot to repair, a lot of truths to be revealed." "I know," he nodded, "and I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions." Whatever it takes. Across the room, the children's laughter filled the air as they opened presents. It was a reminder of what truly mattered, of the future that could be built. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past years, of the planned revenge beginning to dissipate. "Then let's start," she said finally. "One step at a time." As they joined the children to celebrate Christmas, both Claire and Robert knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey. A journey of redemption, forgiveness, and perhaps healing. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope for the future. The snow continued to fall, but the storm had lessened to a gentle snowfall when Claire and Robert arrived at the rusted gates of the Hotel Lavande. The building, once majestic, now stood like a ghost of the past, its broken windows and peeling facade telling a silent story of abandonment and shattered dreams. "Are you sure they're here?" Robert asked, his voice trembling with concern. Claire nodded, her eyes fixed on the dilapidated structure. "It's the only place that makes sense. I used to tell them stories about this place to put them to sleep." As they approached the main entrance, they saw small footprints in the fresh snow. 3 sets, leading straight into the abandoned hotel. "Louis, Anne, Michelle," Claire called, her voice echoing through the empty lobby. The silence that followed was deafening, until a small noise came from upstairs. Without hesitation, Claire ran up the stairs with Robert close behind. The wooden floor creaked dangerously under their feet as they climbed. Reaching the second floor, they heard a muffled cry coming from one of the rooms. "Mum!" Anne's frightened voice called. Claire and Robert rushed into the room, finding the triplets huddled in a corner, shivering from cold and fear. "Oh, thank God," Claire sobbed, hugging them tightly. Robert joined the embrace, tears streaming down his face. "Aunt, you gave us such a scare," he said. His voice choked. But the reunion was interrupted by an ominous sound, the creaking of the wooden floor giving way. "The floor!" Robert shouted, pushing everyone towards the hallway seconds before part of the room collapsed. The sudden movement, however, caused more damage to the already fragile structure. Cracks began to spread through the hallway. "We have to get out of here now," Claire shouted. Picking up Anne, Robert grabbed Louis and Michelle, one in each arm, and they began to run towards the stairs, but the path was blocked by fallen beams. "Over there!" Claire pointed to a service staircase at the end of the hallway. They ran, the floor trembling under their feet. Robert is with the 2 boys in his arms, lagged behind. "Go!" he shouted to Claire. "I'm right behind you." Claire hesitated for a second, but the determined look in Robert's eyes made her continue. She descended the stairs with Anne, hearing Robert's heavy footsteps behind her. When they reached the ground floor, a deafening crash echoed through the building. Claire turned just in time to see Robert jump the last few steps, the ceiling collapsing behind him. They ran outside, the cold snow on their faces a relief compared to the dust and debris inside the hotel. They had barely reached a safe distance when they heard the rest of the structure collapse. Claire watched, horrified, as the Hotel Lavande, the place of so many happy memories from her childhood, crumbled completely. Robert set the boys down and turned to Claire, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" Claire could only nod, unable to speak. The children, frightened but unharmed, clung to their parents' legs. "I'm sorry," Louis murmured, tears in his eyes. "We didn't mean to cause trouble." Robert knelt down, getting to the children's eye level. "The important thing is that you're safe, but never do something like this again. Understand? You could have gotten seriously hurt." Michelle looked at the hotel ruins. Was this where Mom lived? Claire felt a lump in her throat. "Yes, dear. This was your grandparents' hotel." Anne hugged her mother tightly. "I'm sorry we destroyed your home, Mom." Claire kissed the top of her daughter's head, silent tears streaming down her face. "You didn't destroy anything, my love. It's just bricks and wood. What matters are the memories and the people we love." Robert watched the scene, his heart heavy with the weight of guilt. This hotel, this life Claire had, it had all been destroyed by his greed years ago. And now, ironically, its physical collapse symbolized the end of an era. "Claire," he began, his voice trembling, "I know that nothing I say or do can make up for what happened, but—" Claire interrupted him, raising her hand. Her eyes, though tearful, had a clarity Robert hadn't seen in years. "Robert, look at them," she said, indicating the triplets. "You risked your life to save them." Without hesitation, Robert looked at the children, feeling a love so deep it almost choked him. "They're our children, Claire. I would do anything for them." In that moment, watching Robert embrace the triplets protectively, Claire felt something shift inside her. The revenge she had nurtured for so long, the desire to see Robert pay for his crimes, began to dissipate like the morning mist. "I have a choice to make," Claire said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. Robert looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Claire took a deep breath, looking at the hotel ruins and then at her family. For years I lived with anger, with the desire for revenge. I planned every detail of how I would make you pay for what you did to my family." Robert lowered his eyes, the shame evident on his face. "But now," Claire continued, "seeing you with our children, seeing how much you love them, I realize I have a choice. I can continue down the path of revenge, destroy you and consequently hurt our children, or I can choose forgiveness and the chance for a new beginning." The children looked from one to the other, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing the importance of the moment. Robert stepped forward, his eyes filled with tears. "Claire, I don't deserve your forgiveness." What you did was terrible," Claire interrupted, "and there will be consequences. But looking at our children, at the future they deserve, I choose forgiveness, not for you, not for me, but for them." The silence that followed was filled with emotion. The past and present met in that moment, between the ruins of a shattered dream and the promise of a future to be built. Robert, unable to contain his emotions, embraced Claire and the children. "I promise," he sobbed, "that I'll do everything in my power to make things right, to be the father and the man you all deserve." As the sun began to break through the clouds, illuminating the ruins of the Hotel Lavande, Claire felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, she saw the possibility of a future not marked by bitterness and resentment. "Let's go home," she said softly, taking Anne and Louis's hands while Robert carried Michelle. Together, they walked away from the ruins, leaving behind not just a crumbling building, but also the weight of the past. Ahead, though uncertain, lay a path of redemption, forgiveness, and perhaps a chance for true happiness. The hospital corridor was silent, except for the occasional beep of machines and the distant murmur of conversations. Claire was sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her eyes fixed on the door of the room where the triplets were being examined. Robert paced back and forth, the tension evident in every movement. "They'll be fine," Claire said softly, more to herself than to Robert. "They're strong." Robert stopped, looking at her with eyes filled with guilt and concern. "Claire, Before he could continue, the room door opened and the doctor came out. Both of them stood up immediately. "How are they, doctor?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. The doctor smiled reassuringly. "They're fine. A bit dehydrated and with mild hypothermia, but nothing that a few hours of observation and care can't fix. You can see them now." Claire and Robert entered the room, where the triplets were lying in beds side by side, covered with thermal blankets. Their little faces lit up when they saw their parents. "Mom! Dad!" Anne called, reaching out her arms. Claire rushed to hug them, tears of relief streaming down her face. Robert stood in the doorway for a moment, overwhelmed by the scene. "Come, Dad." Louis noticed Robert's hesitation. With hesitant steps, Robert approached and joined the family embrace. For a few minutes, they stayed like that, just feeling each other's presence, grateful to be together and safe. But the peace of the moment was interrupted when 2 police officers entered the room. "Mr. Laurent," one of them called, "we need to ask you some questions about the incident." Robert stepped away from the embrace, straightening his shoulders. He looked at Claire, then at the children, and finally back at the police officers. "Actually, officers," he said, his voice firm but trembling, "there's something I need to confess." Claire widened her eyes, realizing what Robert was about to do. "Robert, no," she began, but he interrupted her with a pleading look. "It's time to face the consequences, Claire," he said softly. Turning to the police officers, he continued, "Gentlemen, what happened today is a direct result of my past actions, criminal actions that caused irreparable damage to many people, including Mrs. Dubois' family." The police officers exchanged surprised looks, while Claire watched, her heart pounding. Robert began to detail his past actions: the fraud, the financial manipulation, the scheme that led to the ruin of the Hotel Lavande, and, indirectly, the death of Claire's parents. The children listened in silence, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. Claire, torn between the shock of Robert's public confession and concern for the children, didn't know how to react. When Robert finished his confession, the room was silent for a few tense seconds. The police officers exchanged serious looks. "Mr. Laurent, understand that what you just confessed are serious crimes," one of them said. "We'll have to take you to the station for a formal statement." It was at this moment that Claire felt something shift inside her. Seeing Robert ready to face the consequences of his actions, willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of truth and family, she made a decision. "Wait," Claire said, her voice firm. All eyes turned to her. "Before you take Robert, there's something you need to know." Claire then told her part of the story, how she had planned her revenge, how she had used the children as part of her plan, how she too had manipulated situations to get to this point. "What Robert did was wrong, yes," she concluded, "but I'm not innocent in this story either. If you're taking him, you'll have to take me too." The triplets, listening to all this, began to cry. "No," Michelle shouted, "don't take our parents." Anne and Louis joined the protests, begging for the family to stay together. The police officers seemed disconcerted, looking from Robert's spontaneous confession to Claire's unexpected intervention, and then to the distressed children. The older officer sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "Look," he said finally. "Clearly this is a complicated situation. Given that we have voluntary confessions and no one is trying to flee, I think we can postpone the formalities for now." His partner nodded. "We'll give you a few days to sort this out." He gestured vaguely to the family. "But we expect to see you at the station next week for formal statements." "Understood?" Robert and Claire nodded, grateful for the unexpected understanding. When the police officers left, the room fell silent again, broken only by the occasional sobs of the children. Claire sat on the edge of Anne's bed, pulling Louis and Michelle closer. Robert knelt beside them, his hand finding Claire's almost instinctively. "Children," Claire began, her voice soft, "what you heard today, it's complicated. Adults sometimes make big mistakes. Mistakes that deeply hurt other people. And sometimes, when we're hurt, we think of doing things that aren't right either." Robert continued, "But what we learned today, what you taught us, is that family, true family, means forgiveness, means trying to be better, means loving even when it's hard." The triplets looked at their parents, their eyes still shining with tears, but now there was also understanding and, surprisingly, hope. "As I still see Mum, are we staying together?" Anne asked timidly. Claire and Robert exchanged a look, years of pain dissolving in the face of the love they felt for their children and the possibility of redemption before them. "Yes, dear," Claire replied, squeezing Robert's hand. "We're staying together, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. A lot to fix, a lot of people to make amends to." Robert nodded, his voice choked with emotion, "And that's exactly what we're going to do. Together, as a family, we'll do what's right. We'll fix the mistakes of the past and build a better future." Louis is always the practical one. He's asked, "How are we going to do that?" Robert smiled, for the first time in a long time, feeling a true sense of purpose. "Well, for starters, I'll use my resources to rebuild the Hotel Lavande. Not just as a hotel, but as a community center, a place to help families who have gone through hardships." Claire looked at him, surprised and touched by the suggestion. "And I can use my experience to help run it, to ensure it truly makes a difference in people's lives." The children smiled, hugging their parents tightly. In that moment, in that hospital room, a new journey began. A journey of redemption, true forgiveness, and the reconstruction not just of a hotel, but of a family and a community. The path ahead would be long and, undoubtedly, full of challenges. But for the first time in years, both Claire and Robert felt a genuine hope. A hope born not from revenge or ambition, but from the unconditional love of 3 children who reminded them of the true meaning of family. As night fell outside, the family remained united, the first chapter of their new story being written not with ink, but with whispered promises, tight hugs, and the determination to turn the mistakes of the past into lessons for a better future. The morning sun bathed the grounds where the Hotel Lavande once stood. Now, scaffolding and construction machinery occupied the space, the constant noise of work echoing through the area. Robert Laurent, dressed in a hard hat and work boots, an unusual sight for the once impeccable businessman, supervised the work, his eyes shining with determination. Claire arrived, carrying a tray with water bottles. She watched for a moment before approaching, still marveling at the transformation she saw before her eyes. "How are things going today?" she asked, offering a bottle to Robert. He smiled, accepting the water gratefully. "Progressing well. The architect said we're ahead of schedule." Claire nodded, her eyes scanning the site. The once ruined hotel was now a promise of something new, something better. "It's still strange to see you like this," she commented, a slight smile on her lips. Robert laughed softly. "Believe me, it's strange for me too, but I feel like I'm doing something right for the first time in a long time." The Hotel Lavande reconstruction project was not just a restoration, but a complete reinvention. The new building would be a community center, offering temporary shelter for families in need, job training programs, and a free clinic. As they walked through the construction site, Claire and Robert discussed the project details. The ease with which they worked together now was a testament to how far they had come in the past months. "The triplets are eager to see the progress," Claire mentioned. "So they won't stop talking about the playroom we promised for the center's children." Robert smiled at the thought of the children. "They've been incredible throughout this process, so understanding, so mature." Claire nodded, feeling a wave of pride. "They really have. I think this whole situation has made them grow in a way we never imagined." As they talked, a group of community volunteers arrived. They were people whose lives had been affected, directly or indirectly, by Robert's past actions. Now, they were here to help with the reconstruction, not just of the hotel, but of an entire community. Robert greeted them, humility evident in his posture. Initially, many had been skeptical of his intentions, but over the months, his dedication and hard work had begun to earn the community's trust. Mr. Laurent, an elderly lady called. It was Mrs. Dubois, a former employee of the original hotel. "I brought some old photos I thought might be useful for decorating the new lobby." Robert accepted the photos carefully, his eyes filling with emotion as he saw images of the hotel in its glory days. "This is incredible, Mrs. Dubois. Thank you so much." Claire looked at the photos, feeling a lump in her throat. There were her parents, smiling, in front of the hotel. Memories she thought had been lost forever. "We can use these in the memorial we're planning," she suggested, her voice slightly choked. Robert nodded, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with understanding and support. As the day progressed, more community members arrived to help. Children ran around the site, helping to plant flowers in the newly created beds. Teenagers painted colorful murals on the temporary walls, depicting scenes of hope and unity. Louise, Rix, Anne, and Michelle arrived after school, eager to see the progress. They ran to their parents, their eyes shining with excitement. "Dad, Mom, look what we did at school today," Michelle exclaimed, showing a drawing of what looked like the new community center. "It's beautiful, dear," Claire smiled, hugging her son. Louis, always the most observant, looked around with approval. "It's looking amazing. I can't wait to show my friends." Anne, the shyest of the 3, took Robert's hand. "Dad, can we help too?" Robert knelt to her level, smiling gently. "Of course you can, Princess. How about you help choose the colors for the children's room?" The triplets eagerly agreed, running to where the paint samples were displayed. Claire watched the scene, her emotions in turmoil. Seeing Robert interact so naturally with the children, seeing his genuine dedication to this project of redemption, It was something she never imagined possible months ago. "They look so happy," she commented softly. Robert looked at her, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "They are our second chance, Claire. Her chance to do things right." As the sun began to set, the construction site transformed. Lights were turned on, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Someone brought a guitar, and soon soft music filled the air. The community gathered for an impromptu picnic. People who had once been strangers, or even enemies, now shared stories and laughter. The reconstruction project had become more than just a building. It was the reconstruction of community ties, of trust, of hope. Claire found a moment of quiet, stepping away from the crowd, looking at the skeleton of the new building, lit against the night sky. She felt a deep sense of peace. The hotel of her parents was being reborn, not just in physical form, but in spirit. Robert found her there, offering her a cup of hot tea. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Claire smiled, accepting the drink. "About how life takes turns. A year ago, I was consumed by the desire for revenge. And now we're here," Robert completed, understanding perfectly. They stood in silence for a moment, just appreciating the view and each other's company. "You know," Claire began, hesitantly, "I think I'm finally starting to trust again. Not just in you, but in life, in the future." Robert looked at her, his eyes shining with emotion. "That means a lot to me, Claire, more than you can imagine." Suddenly, the triplets ran up to them, their faces lit with joy. "Mum, Dad, come see. We made a mural with everyone from the community." Claire and Robert let themselves be pulled by the children back to the heart of the celebration. The mural was a burst of colors and shapes, each person represented in some way. In the center, the new community center was depicted with the words, "Our Home," written in large letters. Looking at that representation of unity and hope, at the smiling faces around them, at their children full of enthusiasm, Claire felt that they were finally on the right path. The past was being healed, not erased, but transformed into a foundation for a better future. Robert, noticing her emotion, gently took her hand. They were no longer former bitter lovers, nor reluctant partners in a revenge plan. They were companions on this journey of redemption and reconstruction. As the night progressed, filled with music, laughter, and promises of a better tomorrow, Claire finally understood the true meaning of a fresh start. It was not about erasing the past, but learning from it. It was not about forgetting the pain, but turning it into strength. It was about building something new and beautiful from the ruins, just as they were doing with the Hotel Lavande. And there, under the stars, surrounded by her family and community, Claire knew that they were on the right path. The reconstruction was not just of the hotel, but of lives, of relationships, of dreams. It was the beginning of a new chapter, full of possibilities and hope. 6 months had passed since the start of the reconstruction, and the Lavande Community Center was finally in full operation. What was once an ambitious project was now a vibrant reality, pulsating with life and purpose. Claire watched from her office window on the second floor, a soft smile on her lips as she saw families entering and exiting the building. Children laughed in the newly built playground, while adults participated in job training workshops in the main hall. Her hand instinctively rested on her still flat belly, holding a precious secret. She had discovered the pregnancy just a week ago and hadn't yet told Robert. The news had taken her by surprise, but it brought with it a wave of joy she hadn't expected to feel again. A gentle knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to see Robert enter, carrying 2 cups of tea. "So I thought you might need a break," he said, offering her a cup. Claire accepted gratefully, noticing how the simple gesture of Robert bringing her tea had become a comforting habit in the past months. It was one of the many small signs of how he had changed, of how they both had changed. "How did the meeting with the investors go?" she asked, sitting at her desk. Robert smiled, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. "Better than expected. They're impressed with the impact the center is having on the community. They want to expand the project to other cities." Claire nodded, feeling a wave of pride. "That's wonderful, Robert. Who would have thought we'd be here 6 months ago? Robert looked at her tenderly. Certainly not me. You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve, Claire. You and the children, you transformed me. Claire felt her heart race. It was the perfect moment. Speaking of transformations, she began, her voice soft, I have something to tell you. Robert tilted his head, curious. Claire guided his hand to her belly. I'm pregnant, she said simply, watching Robert's face light up with understanding and then pure joy. Claire, he exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. This is incredible. Tears of happiness shone in both their eyes as they separated. Robert caressed her face gently. Thank you, he whispered. For this new life, for our family, for everything. The moment was interrupted by the sudden sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway. The door burst open, revealing the triplets, followed closely by the housekeeper, Madame Elise. Mom! Dad! Louis exclaimed. You won't believe what happened at school today. Claire and Robert exchanged an amused look before turning to the children. The triplets, now almost 8 years old, were flourishing. The adaptation to the new life, which they both feared would be difficult, proved to be surprisingly smooth. And the most observant noticed something different. Why are you smiling like that? She asked, suspicious. Michel, always intuitive, widened his eyes. Do you have a surprise for us? Robert laughed, pulling the children closer. Actually, we do. Your mum and I have some very special news. Claire knelt, getting to the children's eye level. Dad, what would you think about having a little brother or sister? There was a moment of stunned silence before the triplets exploded into joyful shouts and excited questions. Madame Elise, who had become a loving and constant presence in the family's life, discreetly wiped away a tear of happiness. Oh, mes chéris, she exclaimed, hugging Claire. What wonderful news! The scene in the room was one of pure joy. Robert hugged the triplets, answering their excited questions about the baby, while Claire received the warm congratulations of Madame Elise. Later that night, after the children had finally gone to bed following hours of excited planning for the new family member, Claire and Robert sat on the porch of their home, watching the city lights. Are you happy? Robert asked softly, holding Claire's hand. She smiled, leaning against him. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. If someone had told me a year ago that we'd be here now, I would have laughed. Robert nodded, understanding perfectly. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? Claire thought about everything they had been through, the pain, the anger, the hard-won forgiveness. She thought about the community center, the lives they were changing, the family they had built. You know, she said after a moment, I think we finally found balance. Robert looked at her, curious. How so? Between the past and the future, Claire explained. We're no longer held back by what happened, but we haven't forgotten it either. We're using our experiences, even the painful ones, to build something better. Robert squeezed her hand gently. You're right, and I promise that I will continue to work every day to deserve this life, this family. Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with love and renewed trust. We'll do it together, Robert, as a family. As they sat there, watching the night deepen, the couple felt a sense of peace and contentment they hadn't known in years. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge, every obstacle overcome, had brought them to this moment of balance and happiness. And there, under the stars, with the promise of a new beginning growing inside Claire, they knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together stronger and more united than ever. The snow fell gently outside the Lavande Community Center, covering the world with a white, pure blanket. Inside the lobby was filled with people, all gathered for a very special celebration on Christmas Eve. Claire, with an 8-month pregnant belly, stood before a covered plaque, her heart beating with anticipation. Robert stood beside her, holding her hand firmly, while the triplets, now 9 years old, fidgeted excitedly in front of them. Is everyone ready? Claire asked, her voice choked with emotion. With a collective nod from the crowd, Claire and Robert pulled together the cloth covering the plaque, revealing Jean and Marie Dubois Memorial Wing, founders of the Hotel Lavande. A murmur of approval ran through the crowd, followed by warm applause. Claire felt tears in her eyes as she saw the smiling faces of her parents in the framed photograph next to the plaque. Your parents would be so proud, dear, Robert whispered, kissing her temple softly. Claire nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Louis, always attentive to his mother's emotions, held her free hand. "Are Grandpa and Grandma watching us from heaven, Mom?" he asked. "Yes, my love," Claire replied, smiling through her tears. "And I'm sure they're very happy with what they see." The ceremony continued with Robert, giving an emotional speech about transformation, forgiveness, and the true spirit of community. As he spoke, Claire couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey they had undertaken in the past year. After the speech, to everyone's surprise, Robert turned to Claire. "A year ago, on this very night, our lives changed forever," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve, Claire, and every day since then I've worked to be worthy of that forgiveness, of that love." Claire looked at him, confused but deeply moved. Robert then knelt before her, pulling out a small box from his pocket. "See, Claire Dubois, will you do me the honor of renewing our vows, here and now, before our family and community?" Breathless, Claire nodded, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The triplets jumped with excitement, while Madame Elise quickly organized an impromptu ceremony. In minutes, Claire and Robert stood hand in hand before everyone, the triplets by their side, ready to exchange renewed vows. "Claire," Robert began, "I promise to love you and our children every day of my life. I promise never to take anything for granted again, and to work tirelessly to deserve the wonderful family we have. You taught me the true meaning of forgiveness and unconditional love, and for that I will be eternally grateful." Claire, deeply moved, responded, "Robert, a year ago I wouldn't have believed this moment was possible, but you proved that people can change, that love can overcome even the deepest wounds. I promise to continue walking by your side on this journey of redemption and love, creating together the family we always dreamed of." They exchanged rings, assisted by the triplets, who beamed with joy at being part of this special moment. After the exchange of vows, the celebration turned into a community party. Music filled the air, people danced and laughed, and the spirit of Christmas was palpable. In a quiet moment, Claire found Robert watching the scene with a serene smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "About how rich we are," he replied, kissing the top of her head. Claire raised an eyebrow, amused. "Rich? Me?" Robert laughed softly. "Not in money, my love. In everything that truly matters. Family, love, community, purpose. I spent so much of my life pursuing material wealth, but only now do I understand the true meaning of being rich." Claire felt her heart fill with love. "You're right. We are truly blessed." At that moment, Anne ran up to them, breathless with excitement. "Mom, Dad, come see. We're decorating the giant Christmas tree in the lobby." Hand in hand, Claire and Robert followed their daughter to the enormous pine tree that dominated the center of the lobby. The triplets, along with other children from the community, hung colorful ornaments on the lower branches, while adults took care of the higher parts. "Look, Mom!" Michelle exclaimed, showing an ornament shaped like a hotel. "We made this at school to represent the old Hotel Lavande." Claire took the ornament, deeply moved by the gesture. She hung it in a prominent place on the tree, feeling as if she were connecting the past to the present. As the night wore on, more and more people joined in decorating the tree. Each ornament seemed to tell a story. There were those made by the children of the center, others donated by community families, and even some rescued from the ruins of the old hotel. Robert embraced Claire from behind, his hands resting gently on her prominent belly. "Our little Christmas miracle," he murmured, feeling the baby move. Claire smiled, leaning against him. "Another gift for our already perfect family." As they watched the scene before them, the triplets laughing and playing, Madame Elise distributing Christmas cookies, community members sharing stories and memories, Claire felt a deep peace settle in her heart. The Christmas tree, now fully decorated, sparkled with twinkling lights, a perfect symbol of the transformation they had lived through. Each ornament, each light, represented a life touched, a story of redemption, a promise of a better future. When the clock struck midnight, officially marking Christmas, the community gathered around the tree. Robert raised his glass of juice in solidarity with Claire and proposed a toast to forgiveness, which sets us free, to love, which transforms us, and to family, both by blood and chosen, which completes us. Merry Christmas to all. The glasses clinked, voices rose in joy, and in the center of it all, Claire and Robert shared a tender kiss, surrounded by the triplets. As the celebration continued around them, Claire looked at the Christmas tree, then at her family. In that moment, she truly understood the meaning of Christmas. It wasn't the gifts under the tree, but the love, forgiveness, and hope that filled their hearts. And this, she thought, caressing her belly and smiling at Robert and the children, was the true gift of Christmas, and it was more precious than any wealth money could buy. The Christmas tree, now fully decorated, sparkled with twinkling lights, a perfect symbol of the transformation they had lived through. Each ornament, each light, represented a life touched, a story of redemption, a promise of a better future. When the clock struck midnight, officially marking Christmas, the community gathered around the tree. Robert raised his glass of juice in solidarity with Claire and proposed a toast to forgiveness, which sets us free, to love, which transforms us, and to family, both by blood and chosen, which completes us. Merry Christmas to all. The glasses clinked, voices rose in joy, and in the center of it all, Claire and Robert shared a tender kiss, surrounded by the triplets. As the celebration continued around them, Claire looked at the Christmas tree, then at her family. In that moment, she truly understood the meaning of Christmas. It wasn't the gifts under the tree, but the love, forgiveness, and hope that filled their hearts. And this, she thought, caressing her belly and smiling at Robert and the children, was the true gift of Christmas, and it was more precious than any wealth money could buy.